Hi there, this is Silas. I'm joined by Armunn, and we're going to be discussing a sort of post-conversation discussion on my conversation with AI, or with the AI video. So we're going to go through it and some of the things that Armunn gleaned from it, and we're going to discuss, obviously, the answers of the AI and the very, what appeared to be, anomalous answers regarding Yaldabaoth, its nature and what it desires. So, hello Armunn, welcome.
Hey there, Silas. Always a pleasure. So, I still remember when you first presented that as a text. Excuse me. That it would be interesting to put it in a video format because it's. It increases the legibility of the responses, and people can more easily connect and distinguish your questions from the answers as well. And we got some fascinating stuff. Now, to start with, I would begin by saying that I am of the opinion that we are or that you were in this case, still talking with a glorified search engine, a very good and very quick and very complete search engine, but nonetheless a search engine. I don't think the responses come from an actual intelligence or volition, at least not at this point. But nonetheless, it's interesting to see the pool that it's drawing from, that it's drawing its responses from. Where do you want to start? About the Yaldabaoth, how it would rule the world, or?
Yes, we'll discuss that. That seems to be the most, pressing topic, I guess, of the answers. Yep.
Yeah, it's very interesting that it was able to go pick up the methods that are obviously in application already for a long time, in terms especially of pretending to be the savior and pretending to and even joining forces with a small group of people. So those I think were very, very important and key points that it seems that it has no guardrails in place for yet, and so or maybe it was even left there for let's see if someone asks, and we'll be happy to oblige. But it does seem to lay out the plan very well, and especially those 2 points I think are key points, because the religious side and at the religious side, which would be the savior imitation, let's say, and on the political side, which would involve joining forces with a nation that then expands the influence, are 2 absolutely key points that we see in motion, I think. It would be it would have been when I was listening again this last in this video format. I was like wanting to ask it a question, which would be, would Yaldabaoth write a narrative involving that very takeover, so that the real takeover would be hidden behind it? You understand? So that you can see a fake puppet kind of tyrant, which would be, a sort of scapegoat, but the real actions would be taken behind it, and it would have been interesting to see how it would respond, but nonetheless, it's too late for that now.
Yeah, I was the same when I was editing its answers, into the sort of robotic AI voice, and I was thinking when I was listening to it back, I was like, oh my god, I should have asked it this, I should have asked it that. because it seemed like it was on I don't know, a stream of, like what you're saying, unfiltered.
Without guardrails.
Unfiltered, yeah, without guardrails, an unfiltered search of the internet for these answers, and I was actually taken aback by it. There was a few things I had to reword within when I was posing the questions to it. I had to use the word shared agenda instead of conspiracy. You use conspiracy, and obviously that's one of the guardrails, but the guardrails seem very still in a primitive state, so I think I've caught it at the correct time. But yeah, absolutely. I even went into some of the various things this small group would do, debt traps, geographical exploitation, fiat currency manipulation, informational control, economic leverage through debt slavery, and some of the promises that Yaldabaoth may use, and that he would choose a vulnerable, isolated nation. That would be something he would choose, and he would state to them that they are chosen, that they are superior, if you will, and he would promise them immortality, a vast domain, essentially, a right-hand position when he comes to full ascendancy. But yeah, absolutely, that would have been a great question to pose it. Is this merely a sort of shadow of a shadow? Is this something that's merely projected, and is the narrative being projected so that we are distracted about who is actually running the show per se?
Yes.
But
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was finished my point, please.
And I think that the choosing of the people occurred before they were small and isolated, because I think that it was Yaldabaoth that led them to be isolated in the first place. So the choice emerged even before the people identified themselves as as a people or as a separate kind of group. One of the things that we do see, and of course this is also in your book, Yahweh is Satan, we do see is that its choice must have focused on people that had been through some kind of trauma, due to the fact that they were so compatible with that trauma that they would willingly give themselves into what is, nothing less than a sort of psychopathic entity. Whether one considers it real or imaginary, that's not the point right now. But that they would give in to this kind of personality that I would say egregore in nature, or even create that egregore out of the trauma. So there's also that possibility that it was the group, the traumatized group, that in their derangement after such a big trauma that must have been somewhere in the past, created an egregore to use as a tool, as a sort of esoteric technological tool, to invert the situation. Because my idea is, and we will go there later on in the conversation, but my idea is that, as you know, the demiurge is a shadow of the self image of the essence, let's say, what the essence would consider itself to be before knowing what it actually is, and being that rejection. And so anyone that is in a position of ultimate rejection, ultimate trauma, will more easily either feed an existing egregoric entity that has those compatibilities, or create one for their agenda. So I think that there may even be the possibility that the choosing part came even before that group was separate, because one of the things that we do see Yahweh doing is separating, creating a clear division between you are my chosen, you are, this, and all the others are something different, right? And you are not supposed to even mingle with them in an honest way, so in an organic, authentic way. If you are truly a follower of that deity, right?
That's an interesting point that you've raised regarding perhaps that this... And I agree, I think of this as an archetypal force. It's a force of rejection. We could actually state that the very descent of all involuted spirit into its material, perceivable form, and its temporal form at that, is the product of these continual rejections. So much so that, like an individual who is being chucked into the ocean with all of this burden, all of this weight tied to his leg, like a concrete cube. He is dragged ever deeper down to the depths of the abyss, to lower vibrational states where he can no longer envision or even view the light above. So I think perhaps that is Yaldabaoth's plan. He seeks, and this is what the AI states as well, he seeks to make that distinction, or that detachment, if you will, from any potential light seeping through, to create an impenetrable darkness of ignorance, a womb of blindness, because of course he is sackless, the blind or witless God. I think what you've stated regarding this notion that he put them into that position, I think is a very profound point. I mean, you even see with the quote-unquote Holy Land, of course, from my study, I don't think they emerged from there. I think they go back to the Hyksos and then stem back from the Amorites and then all the way back to probably the Pashupati cult of the Harappan civilization. And I posit certain pieces of evidence for that. I think that they were driven into this nomadic lifestyle into the Western Asiatic region because it is harsh, because they became boorish as a reflection of the geography of it. And I think, like what you're stating, they were pushed into that by this force because the geography of a place reflects onto the psychology of its inhabitants. It literally molds the inhabitants. The mountains cut out from the psyche a certain characteristic. This is exhibited as a sort of zeitgeist, a soul image of the people. And I think exactly that's probably what's happened. And it's quite interesting you've brought up that point. It's quite a profound point.
Yeah, in a previous discussion that I had, I participated in his live stream with Bach Precision. I presented the idea there with at least one particular example was the Judea city, a city called Judea in Siam, which is now Thailand. Whose depiction is so similar to Constantinople, Byzantium, whose depiction is so similar to Besançon in France. And so we see that most probably the template, the blueprint of a holy land or a holy city, the let's say the place where the temple is. And I do not think that necessarily it has to be a physical temple, which I think is something that is missing. So I'm not denying that it may be a physical temple, but it does not necessarily need to be a physical temple. And it seems that that blueprint of the Holy Land may have been used several times in repeat over whatever the past was. I am very, as you know, very skeptical about written records of history. I think much of it, it was a narrative put in place to make up for whatever was there, to hide whatever was there. And the fact that in this last present iteration, it involved a deserted kind of land, like you said, in this, because when we look, and Bach even suggested something that I wasn't aware that. What was that author? Oh my God, he's so well known. The guy that wrote Tom Sawyer.
Copperfield?
No. Oh God, the name evades me. Let me just look it up. This is
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, of course. Yeah.
I don't know why I said Copperfield.
Yeah. Mark Twain, that he visited. Apparently, he visited Jerusalem, and he had several things to say about how underwhelming it was. There was a desert, nothing was going on, and he thought he was going to be amazed by visiting the holy city, and all he found was, basically desert and nothing much there. So that is important because in this last iteration, the mentality is indeed an arid mentality, which does not mean that in past iterations of the same narrative, the same egregore or a different egregore used different traits of personality. For example, if we were to consider the Iberian Peninsula, somewhere in the Iberian Peninsula, Tom Carberry identifies a possible Jerusalem, that I would say one of the iterations of Jerusalem as being in Barcelona, which in my view would mean that in somewhere in the past, Barcelona, before it was called Barcelona, was, someone imposed upon it the story of the Holy Land being there to provide a context that later became in written history what is called the Reconquista, so the reconquest of the Christians of the south of the Iberian Peninsula from the Moors, and that could have acted as a catalyst, excuse me, for that. Now, the traits of personality there may have been very different. It could have been more in line with what we identify in the Visigoths kind of mentality, with the bravery in battle, the self-centered even idea of valor and that kind of thing. That seems more in line with at least the written records of the Reconquista, which again I take with a bucket of salt, not even just a pinch. But what I'm saying is that in response to your idea that the deserted and harsh place where they were sent to, that it would put them in the right personality mood, is indeed an important factor that we observe, but it does not necessarily mean that every time this narrative was used, in my view, the same personality traits were brought or were enhanced, let's say, by the egregore. You understand?
Yes, it doesn't preclude certain geographical settings or,
Hmm.
and moreover as well, like what you're stating, it doesn't preclude certain, distinct or differentiated paths being taken to the same agenda. So it's like that idea that all paths lead to Rome. In this sense, whatever the characteristic of the cabal or the clique, and whatever they took, or whatever characteristics they espoused within their tenets or their various religious precepts or their cultural precepts, it didn't have to be entirely the same. I agree.
Yeah, and so one thing that I will not do it if you think it would be too much for the listeners. But one thing that I would like to do is to compare I think it's a very well-known document in these circles, at least. The Gay Manifesto. Ever read it?
I have looked at it, yeah. Yep.
Yes. And put it as a template of how, because you can replace all the gay references or whatever with rejected references, and it will still make absolute sense. So instead of, homosexual references, you replace with whatever rejected characteristics, and you see that it's basically a manifesto of the shadow that wants to be heard. And this is what I think. This is the kind of thing that programs an egregore, or at the very least feeds it, right? So would you like me to read, or you think it's too much?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so it's quite long, but I'll try to edit out some parts if. But it starts with, "We shall sodomize your sons, emblems of your feeble masculinity, of your shallow dreams and vulgar lies. We shall seduce them in your schools, in your dormitories, in your gymnasiums, in your locker rooms, in your sports arenas, in your seminaries, in your youth groups, in your movie theater bathrooms, in your army bunkhouses, in your truck stops, in your all-male clubs, in your houses of Congress, wherever men are with men together. Your sons shall become our minions and do our bidding. They will be recast in our image." Where have we heard this before? "They will come to crave and adore us." Who is speaking here? Right? Do you understand, Silas?
Yes.
Because this is, it clearly conveys the sort of archetypal rejection, right? They will crave and adore us. They will be recast in our image. These are religious terms that we see in religion, right? Now, continuing. Women, you cry for freedom, right? You say you are no longer satisfied with men, that they make you unhappy. We are connoisseurs of the masculine face, the masculine physique. We shall take your man from you then. We will amuse them, we will instruct them, we will embrace them when they weep. Women, you say you wish to live with each other instead of with men. Then go and be with each other. We shall give your men pleasures they have never known, because we are foremost men too, and only one man knows how to truly please another man. Only one man can understand the depth and feeling, the mind and body of another man. Now, of course, here, again, replace the homosexual with the rejection. So what they are saying is only the rejected know how the rejected feels, right? And so when you, and here women would represent sort of the civilization, the society. Women is the center of civilization. Always has been, always will be. And when you reject these men, or you make them rejected, we understand rejection, so we will take them into our group, right? It doesn't even need to, of course, this was written in the Gay Manifesto. It's all about homosexuality, but you can replace those references with any kind of rejection and it still works. And this is why I think this is a fascinating text to go into, because I think that the AI, and I'm not deviating from the topic, the AI was manufactured by this mentality. You understand? So again, all laws banning homosexuality activity will be revoked. We are there. Instead, legislation shall be passed which engenders love between men, even marriage, right? Now, all homosexuals must stand together as brothers. Again, all rejected must stand together as brothers. We must be united artistically, philosophically, socially, politically, and financially. We will triumph only when we present a common face to the vicious heterosexual enemy. You see? We will triumph only when we present a common face to the vicious, non-rejected enemy. Whatever. Just replace. Mm-hmm. It still works. If you dare to cry faggot, fairy, queer at us, we will stab you in your cowardly hearts and defile your dead puny bodies. We shall write poems of the love between men. We shall stage plays in which man openly caresses man. We shall make films about the love between heroic men, which will replace the cheap, superficial, sentimental, insipid, juvenile, heterosexual infatuations presently dominating your cinema screens. I mean, I laugh, but it's tragic, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's the same. It's the same. Like what you're saying, it's the same archetype,
exactly.
And as well, it's again. I think this is unconscious. I don't think they've actually looked at religious texts and they've tried to copy them. I think it's more of a case of either osmosis, right? Just you're culturally exposed to this type of religious archetype, or it comes innately from the psyche, from a rejected part of the psyche.
Yeah, I think that osmosis is egregoric in nature. Yeah. That's why I focus on, we have to take into account egregores, because how an egregore works is it stores an ideology, and it's not just one thought form, right? It's an entire ideology, an entire set of desires from a particular group that created it, and it links to the people that link to it, that are open to it, which usually are the rejected, of course. They're compatible already. If you're downcast, if you're traumatized, it's far easier to then, accept the help of, an egregoric entity such as this. And so I think that who was actually writing this was the egregore, through this... I think his name is Michael Swift, this guy that wrote this. So it wasn't him or his group writing this. It was the egregore. And maybe that's why some people say that some religious texts were written by that particular deity, right? Yeah. In that sense, right? And so just continuing... we shall sculpt statues of beautiful young men, of bold athletes, which will be placed in your parks, your squares, your plazas. The museums of the world will be filled only with paintings of graceful, naked lads. Our writers and artists will make love between men fashionable and de rigueur, and we will succeed because we are adept at setting styles. We will eliminate heterosexual liaisons through usage of the devices of wit and ridicule, devices which we are skilled in employing. You just replace and it works. We will unmask the powerful homosexuals who masquerade as heterosexuals. You will be shocked and frightened when you find that your presidents and their sons, your industrialists, your senators, your mayors, your generals, your athletes, your film stars, your television personalities, your civic leaders, your priests are not the safe, familiar, bourgeois, heterosexual figures you assume them to be. We are everywhere. We have infiltrated your ranks. Be careful when you speak of homosexuals because we are always among you. We may be sitting across the desk from you. We may be sleeping in the same bed with you. This is really something, isn't it?
No, it's absolute insanity. But this is entirely every occult. Pardon me, occult. Every cult is designed this way. All propaganda is to dehumanize a specific, generalized enemy. For example, as we see in Abrahamism, you have this idea of the nations in certain sects. Other sects, you have this idea of the infidel or, you know, the non-believer. And these non-believers are not, they don't necessarily, of course, they don't necessarily, you know, congregate or culturally agglomerate themselves, but you do so because it's more expedient to, of course, the overarching shared agenda of the cult and its adherents, and also it maintains the momentum of fanaticism. It's the same language that's being used as you're pointing out, but it's absolute insanity, and the skewed view, skewed frame of reference for reality is something that almost bypasses, or pardon me, it doesn't it does bypass the intellect and reason, and it gets straight to the heart of, I think Jung called it the id, you know, that instinctual part of oneself. Some people may call it the R complex. What's interesting about the homosexual agenda, though, is it exactly follows the cults and their demographic trajectory. That is, they are not constructive organizations, they are destructive organizations. And the reason they're destructive is because they're totally artificial. So cults, even if they have a natalist policy at their heart, typically that natalism is not done in a sustainable way. So, for example, you have the idea of go forth and multiply in certain sects of Christianity, and you don't have any. There's certain there's certain sects in Christianity where you don't actually have any, apart from marriage. There's no monastic orders that have the idea of celibacy or that promote celibacy or anything like that. It really is go forth and multiply with your wife. That is destructive as well, because you just can't abide by that absolutist principle in times of, say, famine, in times of, say, if you're unsure about the future, if you're unsure about resources. So it's a very, it's a silly absolutist principle. That principle has to be adapted to the circumstance. But in this sense, I mean, we see a crossover between monastic, almost Catholic. I mean, Protestants do this too, this vilification of sex, so they're on the other extreme. But the point at which they intersect is this: it's very anti-natalist. So the homosexual cult, if you will, that's being proposed in this manifesto, it is completely anti-natalist. It requires to recruit from the youth, because of course it cannot produce children. The act is barren, that which they're championing. So by that, it's very similar to Catholicism and the monastic orders of Catholicism. It can only recruit from the non-monastic elements in society, the laity. Yes. So in that sense, all cults are artificial. And if they're artificial, it means they're destructive in that sense.
Yeah, and my friend, let me tell you something that you already know, but just to present, which is it's so similar because the Christians, as in general, were the rejected at a certain point. You understand? So they came from the same. They linked with the same egregore. And I know that this is controversial for probably several listeners, but I don't think you shirk from controversy, so I don't either.
No, I reiterated a similar thing. I didn't mention the rejected, but they're very similar to the woke ideology. But yeah, please, sorry, continue.
Yeah,
in my first bit, yeah.
Yeah, and so it came from the same mentality. Because if you were to replace, in a time when Christians were persecuted and downtrodden and traumatized, if you replace all the homosexual indications here in this text and replace them just with Christian ideas, we will recruit your call it pagan, call it whatever other civilization they were, cultural setting they were in. We know how to reach their souls, instead of we know how to please their bodies, that kind of thing. It works the same way. It is because this text is a sort of blueprint of the mentality, and it applies to, like you well said, any group that has been downtrodden. And let me just finish the text, and I'll link it to the AI. Now, it continues with, there will be no compromises. We are not middle-class weaklings. This is important. We are not middle-class weaklings. Highly intelligent, we are the natural aristocrats of the human race.
Oh my God.
Who thinks this way? And steely-minded aristocrats never settle for less. Those who oppose us will be exiled. We shall raise vast private armies, as Mishima did, to defeat you. We shall conquer the world because warriors inspired by and banded together by homosexual love and honor are invincible, as were the ancient Greek soldiers. Again, replace here by banded together by homosexual love, replace it with banded together by Christ, banded together by, whatever
Jesus.
Ideology, whatever.
Yeah.
So, again, continuing, the family unit, spawning ground of lies, betrayals, mediocrity, hypocrisy, and violence, will be abolished. The family unit, which only dampens imagination and curbs free will, must be eliminated. Perfect boys will be conceived and grown in the genetic laboratory. They will be bonded together in communal setting under the control and instructions of homosexual savants. All churches who condemn us will be closed. Our only gods are handsome young men. We adhere to a cult of beauty, moral, and aesthetic. All that is ugly and vulgar and banal will be annihilated. Since we are alienated from middle-class heterosexual conventions, we are free to live our lives according to the dictates of the pure imagination. For us, too much is not enough. The exquisite society to emerge will be governed by an elite comprised of gay poets. One of the major requirements for a position of power in the new society of homoeroticism will be indulgence in the Greek passion. Any man contaminated with heterosexual lust will be automatically barred from a position of influence. And this reminds me the certainly very I don't even have an adjective to call it, but the rituals that secret societies force or suggest new recruits to go, into past a certain level if they want to reach a position of power, right? I would say that is more or less visible. Anyway, continuing, all males who insist on remaining stupidly heterosexual will be tried in homosexual courts of justice and will become invisible men. We shall rewrite history filled and debased with your heterosexual lies and distortions. We shall portray the homosexuality of the great leaders and thinkers who have shaped the world. We will demonstrate that homosexuality and intelligence and imagination are inextricably linked, and that homosexuality is a requirement for true nobility, true beauty in a man. We shall be victorious because we are fueled, and note this part, this is basically the last paragraph. We shall be victorious because we are fueled with the ferocious bitterness of the oppressed, who have been forced to play seemingly bit parts in your dumb heterosexual shows throughout the ages. We too are capable of firing guns and manning the barricades of the ultimate revolution. Tremble, hetero swine, when we appear before you without our masks. And this is the end.
It's exactly the same sort of mentality as all cults. And I was going to mention as well, because I actually stated the same thing as you, not necessarily on, along the pathway of thought regarding the rejected, but that Christianity, of course, after, about, say, 100, 200 years, the Nicene militant faith, they tore down statues, they utterly uprooted all cultural and social values and replaced them, of course. But as well, interestingly, they were an urban phenomenon. We actually can tell that from the term pagan. The term pagan is derives from a Latin root, which means literally rural folk. So essentially the urban metropolis cosmopolitan Christians saw the sort of rural bumpkins as backwards, and they were the aristocrats, if you will, the urban gentry that settled for nothing less than total cultural domination over these sort of backwater pagan elements. So it's exactly the same thing. That's another thing that connects Christianity with this sort of woke ideology, which of course is very controversial to many people. But of course a lot of people don't really view history or just in general these social phenomena from that sort of vantage point, that tapestry, that panoramic view of it all. I mean, the language it's the same archetype, and this archetype seems to be using these individuals, and of course the general collective, once this begins to spread throughout society, as an instrument, a vicarious instrument of its will.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it is, therefore, like I've stated before, the egregore speaking. And the egregore was programmed with this intention, okay? And with a complete set of an ideology and an intention, and basically steers whoever connects to an egregore in the direction of its accomplishment, of the accomplishment of its programming. The egregore is therefore a type of AI. Okay, and this is where I'm going to link with the AI video. And when we understand this, that an egregore is a type of AI, and it's performing. Of course, this language seems very emotional to us, right? And it is. It triggers emotions and all that. But the AI, in this case, was programmed with and through emotions, unlike the cold AIs that we now have access to, which are basically, in my view, glorified search engines from a pool, bigger or smaller pool of information. The egregores rely, in fact, on emotions, and the stronger the emotion, the stronger is the AI fed, right? And it's through that feeding of emotion, the more, for example, a certain group is repressed, or the more a certain group feels repressed, even if it actually isn't, the more that emotion will move that egregore through its programming further. You could consider it the electricity of that computer, right? The emotion is like the electricity that powers up that computer that is running that program. And so when we understand that the AI's text chats and all the rest, and by all means I also used AI, well, not me particularly, but it was Portal Complex when we did the presentation video for my book. It's a tool like any other, of course, but one must use it knowing where it comes from and knowing what defined it, and what carried it forward, and why also it's being presented right now. And I think it's being presented, of course, with the end goal of the Internet of All Things, and as we've talked about, and you talked about extensively, the passage to the Age of Aquarius, that would be a more technocratic kind of society. But it's not only that. It's that now we have a visible, a tool that is visible. It's like a window to understand how egregores work, right? And if you can imagine, if everyone, in the same way that everyone carries around a smartphone, me included, I never talk as if I'm in a pedestal, above humanity. I'm a part of humanity as any other, with virtues and imperfections and all that. In the same way that people were led to carry their smartphones, they can become sort of addicted to AI in that sense, right? And that will make them compatible with a type of compatibility of thinking, if you like, right? Making them compatible with the egregore. The objective of this, yes, the egregore was programmed to win. It is, of course, due to its programming, convinced that it will lead to victory. As you have also realized, and it's a shared opinion we have, I don't think victory is possible. So in the back of all the rejected minds is not indeed victory. What it is a confrontation, finally, with the ones that rejected them. So when in the text we read, "We the oppressed," right? They want a confrontation with the oppressors. And this confrontation is only made possible through the humiliation. So I will bring you reject acknowledging me. You turn your back on me. You ignore me, right? In that sense. So I will bring you to your knees so that you're forced to confront me, right? And this is, in my view, the cosmic, I would say, cosmic game being played here, because this is merely a sort of fractal of the same duality dance that goes on in the entire reality, with the first duality being what is generally named as God and the devil, right? In my opinion.
I think as well this sort of underpins what we see from this cabal or clique, that the primary fuel that powers their machine of conquest, the perpetuation of their position of power, so on and so forth, is really that idea which they have stumbled upon, which, like what you stated, it interlinks with the grander cosmic structure, the cosmogony, really, of everything, from nothing, if you will, or from the source. So, in that sense, if everything is the oppressor, and that you're the perpetually oppressed, even if you're, you seemingly seem to be in a very, non-oppressed state. Right. In fact, by, the inverse is true. You seem to be the oppressor yourself. You don't think of yourself in that way. You will constantly perpetuate your own victimhood, your own oppression. So, in that sense, the victim complex mentality, it maintains the shadows of shadows of shadows of shadows, which ultimately, I think, is it's the idea I think they've stumbled upon. They stumbled upon maybe, thousands of years back, who knows how long ago, in antiquity, deep antiquity, that the only way to bypass entropy is to maintain yourself in this sort of shadow state as an oppressed or rejected state, to exist within the veil of a shade, to become a spectre, a sort of anachronistic spectre. I mean, for example, Israel. That idea of that state is very anachronistic. You have, they really haven't been their own independent state since, I don't know what. Well, for some time they existed as a semi-independent state under Cyrus the Great. That was the 6th century BC. But really they were only ever an independent state, again, according to official history. You're talking maybe, I don't know, from 1100 BC all the way to, I don't know, what, 900 BC, something like that, when Nebuchadnezzar conquered them, and you had the rise of the Exarchate, with, their exodus into Babylon.
Right.
So it's totally anachronistic. It shouldn't exist. It's a sort of shadow from a bygone time period. Yet it does exist, because it's perpetuating itself as a sort of rejected aspect of history, a rejected aspect of all nations. And in that sense, that is how they bypass entropy. That's why this idea exists sort of out with the bounds of time, of history, out with the constraints of it. And in that sense, I think that is ultimately what they've stumbled upon, and that is what they seek to condense and synthesize through a programmatic black magic, if you will. AI, archonic intelligence. This continual shadows of shadows of shadows of shadows, this continual coiled structure, that perpetuated them within a psychological or psycho-spiritual state throughout history. They seek to merge humanity into that and to create their own distinct cosmological structure, I guess, through that virtual reality of the Internet of all things.
Mhm.
I think that's what they're attempting to, recreate, or to create this recreation of what exists out with in the cosmic structure of everything, what perpetuates the cosmos. And I think where I think what differentiates us from them amongst, the plethora of things, is that we revere nature as it is. We don't seek to contort or manipulate nature to our will. We understand what it is. We attempt to individually, spiritually grow within the mire of nature, be it the good and the bad. And we try and take lessons from all of it. What I believe they seek to do is, I think they began as a cult who worshipped the very what we call Yaldabaoth, or the demiurge, but the very archetypal essence of this primordial darkness that, the very structure of order in the cosmos, which is chaos. I mean, that is the mutually complementary paradox that maintains all of this, all of existence. And I think that's what they worshipped. I think that's what they're they're trying to create in the digital sphere. Sorry, Armunn.
No, I apologize. I think that it will always be there, as long as there's any self-rejection from whatever creating force you want to, conceptualize, because we can only conceptualize, we can't directly know. So call it God, call it whatever. It will always exist there. And one question that I would like to ask you, and of course this is more or less a rhetorical question, but is why would someone choose to venerate, to worship a deity such as this?
Well, assuming that it's not rhetorical, I would say the answer to that is, it comes down to power, and I think it comes down to a fear of cosmic abandonment.
Exactly.
And of course, you have your own ideas of that within a psychic, a psycho-spiritual sense, which I agree with. But I think from the pure, because these individuals are very much purely materialistic, I don't even think they, as individuals, perhaps as a sort of collective unconscious, they may subscribe to this idea. But I think as individuals, they do not subscribe to the idea that God exists. It's like that notion, you see it with the homosexual manifesto. You see almost their God come out in it, but it's not their God, it's merely an extension of their own twisted will. So in that sense, it's similar to the idea, the old, I think it was a quote from one of the crew, I guess it was an author, it was critical of Zionism, I forget their name now, but they stated that the Zionist does not believe that God exists, but that God granted him Palestine. So, in that sense, the God is the extension of one's own will. Now, it doesn't just have to be Abrahamism, it can be anything, like what you just stated. This archetype crops up everywhere.
Yes,
but,
I think, yeah, sorry.
Just to finish my point really quickly,
sorry.
I think in a material aspect, which is what they subscribe to and revere, it is purely, what's a way to describe this? It's simply a way for them to exert their will within the material world and to correct to provide a solution, a resolution to the fear of cosmic abandonment which comes in, through physical death. So they're seeking immortality, I think. They're seeking salvation from that ultimate cosmic abandonment within the physical world.
Yeah, I think abandonment is exactly the key word. They do feel abandonment. And in contrast, I would say that perhaps one of the first things taught to whoever joins such cults is that God exists. In contrast to what you just said, I think that it's perhaps one of the first things that they depict is that they teach is God exists, but God did this to us, and so it is in opposition to what He did that we will now carry out the implementation of this plan through this egregoric technology, or if you like, through this other entity. And you said that in contrast with them, it's because we accept nature and we observe from it. I think that putting it in other words, if you will allow me and correct me if I'm wrong, what we are doing is we are integrating the rejected parts of us, bit by bit, gradually, of course, but we are doing that through the observation of nature. And as we do that, what we actually are achieving is a more direct connection to that essential thing, whatever entity, the creating force. The creating force in an essential way, so I'm not talking about the demiurge. That allows us to see these cults for what they are. And so even when we are, in a position of rejection, and we often are, because as we've seen in this text, which is clearly manifesting in the world, a heterosexual man, especially white man, will always have pushbacks, and will always have a certain rejection, and you have certain obstacles that before weren't there, right? So even in that position, I mean, we could, if we weren't in contact with, if we weren't integrating those shadows, let's say, bit by bit, if we weren't at least so inclined, we would certainly be in a position to also either join or create a similar cult that would oppose the opposing cult. And it would work in the same way, right? Only in the opposite side of the scales, let's say. So I think that it is the integrating of the rejected parts through the observation that is the key here, which you called, through the observation of nature, doing, that same work, accepting that it is there, accepting that there are parts that are pleasing, parts that are displeasing, but that all in a way reflects what we are essentially, and we have to answer the question, right, of who we are in that sense. But correct me if I mistook your words.
No, I agree with your assessment there.
Yeah.
And the extension of that thought, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so the AI and the answers it gave you, it's interesting because when you asked it about its connection to, it called it the monad, it's a word like any other. The AI admitted that this entity, this Yaldabaoth entity, would have to be a shadow of the monad. At one point it stated that. And at another point it stated also that it can never defeat the monad because it is a creation of the monad, so it's limited by the very monad that it created. And of course, I'm using here monad because that was the wording used in the exchange in the video. And so that to me was very, very interesting, that it was drawing from whatever pool it was drawing from. It didn't have any qualms in presenting what is perhaps in a set of studies that these cults have for their own. It's probably something you probably peeked into, something that it may even be publicly available, but not highlighted, let's say, right? I've had a commenter, a very interesting commenter on the latest podcast episode 10 with Reverse History, that he commented. He was named Vladimir something, and now the name evades me, but he commented that it's all there, visible, but part of that humiliation of the other side is that it's the people themselves that choose the wrong information, that choose the easier way of doing things, and societal rules or culture, etc. And we saw that in 2020, even though it was not the easier, but it was the easiest because it involved a consensus of sorts, or an idea of consensus. So I think that it's the AI is clearly, let's say, an extension, a more, although it's not physical, but nearing a physical manifestation of this egregore. And it may, at a certain point, like you asked in a certain part of the video, if the Yaldabaoth was to create synthetic entities, right? That those synthetic entities would be a physical manifestation, let's say, of the said egregore, and the AI that we now have and that you were chatting with, let's say, having that exchange with, is already an approximation to that point.
Yes, I think as well, regarding what the AI stated to me, I do not necessarily think, I think that was a sort of virgin line of discourse, because I've tried to speak with the AI after this discussion. I had this initial discussion. It's same sort of questions I've asked it, and I've got totally different answers. In fact, there seems to be a constraint, a censoriousness that's infected its algorithm, and it's providing me, very little information. In fact, a lot of it is quite, they're trying to put one off the trail. It's very evasive. So I think I was probably the first to ask it those specific questions. And in a way, inadvertently, I've probably trained the algorithm to understand, to hone in just what I was actually discussing, what I was asking it. So it's not as readily available to disseminate that information, or to retrieve that information in its totality as it did initially. So I think probably inadvertently I've trained it. But yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, even some of the things that I was discussing with it. So we were discussing this notion of the oppressor and the oppressed, and that the oppressed, the rejected aspect, the shadow, they are destructive because, for example, AI is an extension of this. The only way to stop the oppressor from revisiting that oppression upon you is to essentially destroy all of the... It's almost to create in a Bacchic frenzied manner, a sort of sparagmos, right? A tearing apart, a dismembering of the oppressor.
Humiliation.
Yeah. Yes, but in root and stem, I think to actually recreate the system itself so that oppression can never be revisited again. So in that sense, it makes sense why they're moving towards virtual reality. They're moving towards AI as well. I mean, because ultimately, what is AI? It seems to be a simulacrum of our own ego, or that's seemingly the trajectory of travel for it. So in that sense, they seek to outsource all of our thinking, yes, but as well all of our experience
and decision making.
And decision making to artificial intelligence. And of course, when they establish these virtual realities, this metaverse, if you will, then you're moving in that sort of general trend towards the complete and utter spoliation of what it means to be human, because what it means to be human itself is seen as the potential for oppression in this clique, this cabal, the rejected aspect. So, I mean, what one could say that's really what technology is as well. Tool making, the tools themselves, and not necessarily the utilization of the tools, but the innovation itself. The inventor, his ideas in developing the tools, the technology. It's really to correct humanity. It's to correct what perhaps is absent in humanity, or what is actually of a fallen nature, what is perceived to be as as part of a fallen nature by the inventor in humanity. So I think that's exactly where we're moving towards. It's very much like Frank Herbert's doing. And that's what I got from the answers from AI.
You even mentioned the Butlerian jihad, so...
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I had to mention that. I was like, I forgot to mention that. That was right at the end of the conversation. I was wondering, I wonder how it'll react to that. So I tied it in with, is that similar to Zervan, Ankara, or also called Angra Mainyu, Armunn, the sort of evil... and the evil force, but then again, I mean, Zervan in some Zoroastrian mythologies is considered to be the sort of Abraxian root, that which is beyond both the good and evil, both beyond Ahura Mazda or Spenta Mainyu and Angra Mainyu or Ahriman. He is, the eternality of time, the literal deification of that. So I mentioned that. I mentioned some other things as well. It didn't really pick up on the connections between all of these various mythological forces. I asked, are these all synonymous? But I think it viewed it from a very literalist point of view, and I think it would have been difficult for the AI to fully grasp the nuance of what I was actually asking it in that sense.
Because it's a search engine, a very good one, but still a search engine. So if the reference has never been included in the database, it will not see it in that sense. If a site is not there, he will not find it. The database will not find it. And by the way, just a disclaimer, it's not my fault that Ahriman chose a name for himself that is so close to my username. So I'm not to blame for that. Because
coincidence? I think not.
At several times I thought, but why are you involving me in this? I did nothing. But no, I understood that it was Ahriman and not Armunn. Anyway, you mentioned something very important in what you just stated, which was that this tries to replace the ego. And as you know, this is something that is very focal right now in my contribution. And I think, to begin with, there was a very interesting comment on Odyssey by a user called Shoes Are Okay, that showed his idea, his or her, I don't know, idea of what a strong ego means to him or her, which is that the consideration is a strong ego is an ego connected to essence, a weak ego is an ego connected to an external entity, for example, an egregore, right? This is correct as well. What I would say is that it tries to replace the ego because the ego in general, so the individual egos in general, has already been weakened. So the abandonment, the feeling of abandonment is already there. The feeling of abandonment comes from a mental personality that wants to get a decision from the ego, and the ego is dormant. The ego never actually dies, in the sense of while the mind exists, it never actually disappears, but it can be so disconnected that it's seen or felt as completely absent. Or if it's still there, it's so confused and so beaten down that it can't filter anything, it can't make a decision. So the state of the individual psyche in society is such that, of course, the mental personality will try to find a decision from elsewhere if it can't find it in the ego. And that elsewhere, where before it would have been priesthoods, experts, some sort of authority figure in the external, will now turn into, for example, these AIs, in the sense of, you're in a sort of bifurcation in your life and you ask the AI for advice, right? You ask Gemini and ChatGPT and whatever, what should I do? I am in this conundrum, what should I do? Right? And this is the same thing that is usually internal of the mental personality, which is sort of the mask worn to the outside, asking the ego for advice. And so the best way to prevent the AI from replacing the ego is to strengthening the ego, or, like Shoes Are Okay said, to strengthen the ego's connection to the essence, right? Because if the ego is connected to the essence, it will be in a healthier state, and therefore it will be able to filter and make decisions, which is its basic functions, right? So I would say that is a very, very important point you made there when you, with your assessment that the AI tries to replace the ego.
Well, and just on that note, it's very similar to what J.R.R. Tolkien stated, which is the shadow that bred them can only mock, it cannot make, not real new things of its own. And I think, yes, in that sense, I mean, this really even underpins the drive towards narcissism, which itself is a sort of simulacrum of the true ego. And it's similar to what we probably will discuss with Joker, which is something we also saw etched literally into the masonry of that Convento de Cristo.
Yes.
Where we saw that same mask, the literal synthetic ego that masks the true ego, that sort of confounds it, that mystifies it, that modulates it really into something that's completely alien, completely self-destructive, and so on and so forth. So yes, I agree. The only way to fight this thing, to fight this to resist this war on humanity, is to strengthen the ego and strengthen its connections to that thing which is beyond, that essence which provides us vitality, that which we call our humanity. I mean, the irony of it is that the humanity that is within us, that light, is an essence of the divine. It's the immediate, imminent force of God which dwells within. And, you know, in that sense, we have to be that bulwark of defense against this inhuman world, this machine of sterility that seeks to make of this canvas of life, you know, a dust bowl, essentially, a barren wasteland.
Mm-hmm.
Which, funnily enough, just as a side note, is potentially the real etymology of Zion, which is a compound of two words, Siai, which is Hebrew, and On, which is the Hebraic transliteration of the Kemetic or ancient Egyptian word Yuno, which is pillar. So Ziai, or I forget the longer Hebraic term, but it's an ancient root for desert or barren. So literally the Zion is the pillar of the barren land, or the desert. This obviously ties it in with the Hyksos and their worship of the god of the Desheret, Set, the god of darkness. These, again, it's always this same archetype of rejection. And of course, if we look into mythology, Set was that destructive, rejected aspect which humiliated Osiris, again, dismembered him in a sort of sparagmos, a Bacchic frenzy, a Dionysian frenzy, as Dionysus, means little Zeus. It's this same idea. It's the sackless, it's the jealous god that believes he is the true god. And he cast him in the box and cast him down the river, which of course we see in the constellations as Eridanus, and Osiris as Orion, the slumbering deity that knows not his own deity. He knows not his own divinity. So yeah,
absolutely. And I think that that is done, the process of strengthening the ego, that is done through how you well stated observation of the nature that is actually there, not the virtual reality, but what is actually there. With the pleasing and displeasing, you have to observe both. And in the way that I've also stated, which is the integration of that we observe, as without the rejection of this is not self, right? And this is not to say that we should embrace everything and everything is okay. And no, there has to be discrimination, of course. But what must be understood when integration is meant is that even the displeasing factors came from something that is rejected and misplaced. For example, if a child is continuously rejected, it will increase its misbehavior. It will not decrease the misbehavior and become all of a sudden, a pure integrated part of the family. If a child feels itself excluded because of its very aspects that the parents don't agree with or don't like about it. It will increase its misbehavior exactly to bring the attention of the parents onto itself. Right? You're not paying attention to me, so this way at least I get your attention. So let's break some stuff, or commit a crime or do whatever, so that I get your attention. And it will increase until the responsibility is taken, in the sense of, okay, you came from a perfectly natural as any other child of the family, but since you weren't integrated into the family, you went astray. And this, of course, is also visible in the parable of the a prodigal son, for example, or something like that. There are many stories that depict the departure of this son, to then only return in a more humble state and being welcomed again by the father. But it had, of course, in this case, it's the son that is humiliated. But in what we see in the actual society now is that the son tries to humiliate the father, so that the father, or the parents, so that they are forced to pay attention to him. I think that this archetype has been going on in circles for quite a long time. But it seems to me that it has also been at every turn of that circle. And so instead of a circle per se, I would perhaps call it a spiral. Because in a spiral, the circle never touches the previous point. It goes either a little bit to the outside or a little bit to the inside, right? And so it forms a spiral. There has been a loss of fuel to the opposition, and that loss of fuel, to me, means that more parts of it were integrated at an individual level, and so the objective of these egregores, AIs, etc., like I said, is victory. But I don't think that victory will ever be achieved, and the pendulum or the spiral will go the other way eventually, and it will circle back to the same point, and it's basically a cycle. And Bach, in our live stream, asked me if this had to do with the Hindu idea of the ages, right? Of the cyclical ages, like you have an age of gold, an age of silver, an age of iron, etc. I wouldn't say that it is ages per se, in the sense, of that huge span of years. I don't think it. I think it's quicker. At least it's much quicker now. If the spiral was larger back when that philosophy came about, of course that would make sense. But I think it's much quicker now. I think things are happening much quicker, and the inversion will also be much quicker, and it will continue to accelerate the spiral, in my opinion. So it will go back and forth a few times, not in our lifetimes, but in a relative sense, in terms of humanity, much quicker. That is my view.
It's interesting because both the Quran and, of course, the New Testament, I mean, just generally the New Testament, marking the beginning at Genesis, and then the end, quote, quote, the Omega, the Tav, at Revelation. It's the same structure. I mean, nothing ends at Revelation. It's merely the perfection of the creation. And I think a lot of Christians falsely they falsely identify the end of Revelation with and again, this is what's developed into this very, I would say, unbiblical notion of the rapture. It's developed into this this idea that is the end of time, right? And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think what's being intimated within Revelation is the same idea that we see within the world ages as it's presented in Hinduism, which, and of course, as I've just mentioned, the Quran, even Judaism has it as well. Through it's more pronounced within the Zohar and such, but it's there in Judaism as a sort of semblance of an idea. That after the Kali Yuga, the world simply just it reasserts itself, because the Brahma, the ultimate reality, it can never stay within an inert state. And again, we're going to get into this, I think, in the Joker, but this notion of heaven, as it states within Joker, and I think it touches upon some truth, that heaven itself is a fantasy. I think it's a fantasy born of the same rejected principles. Nothing can... heaven also implies an inert sort of, infinite peace. And that can never occur if we wish to not maintain material existence, but just maintain perception in any sense. So I think the world ages just continue, epoch after epoch, cycle after cycle. It has to. And in that sense, that may be, quite depressing for some individuals. It might be, of course, controversial, totally polemical, what I'm stating there, especially if you come from the modern evangelical Christian world, say in the US or Canada, then, it can be quite depressing. But the thing is, the cosmos just is. You can, God himself, the first principle, pure potential, undifferentiated and unmanifested, it will always differentiate. It will always manifest, because it will always self-react. It will always have some sort of pride, which is the light. The rejection is the shadow that's cast by that pride. It's like water. Water will always be wet.
Well, I would just disagree with one aspect. I agree with everything you said, except one particular aspect, which is that it will always manifest. Because it is true, and I agree, that the heaven idea is an imaginary idea. But what I would consider to be the true heaven would be a state of complete integration into the essence, which means you are, in a metaphorical sense, in the example I just gave previously, you feel part of the family, you have your place in the family, let's say, right? And that family could be God's mind, God's psyche, whatever, right? And so, also, in my image, and this is again my opinion, in my image of the spiral, there will come a point where the spiral reaches a center point, and therefore it stops moving. And when it reaches that central point, it will stop manifesting. It means that everything, all the fuel has been lost, everything has been integrated, and therefore there is no more manifestation, because there is no more rejection, there is no more pride, there is no more shame to feed it, let's say. But that would be just, my views, and of course these only worth as much as that, as my view, and it's just an opinion.
Yeah, I think yes, what one can be reintegrated, and like how you described it. But even when one feels part of the family, there is always that sort of not necessarily jostling for position, but there's never, life itself can especially, of course, material life, it can never fully maintain itself within that inert state. You can never truly have peace. There will always have to be some form of conflict. I think, though...
sorry to interject, just a quick note. I wasn't referring to material existence, because once integration occurs, it's the manifestation of material existence that ceases to be, right? So essence no longer needs to manifest that particular part of itself, because it figured out what that particular part is. So just to interject there, I wasn't referring to material existence.
I agree with you, but I tend to see, I tend to subscribe to the idea, and again, this is just a postulation, so I'm speculating, and of course we are speculating because we don't fully know, but my idea is that the source is almost like the first thought, and I've stated previously that thought is a reactive substance, so I think eventually it will always have to self-react, eventually, further on down the line, and that will establish another pathway of inquiry into itself. I mean, there's even the aspect as well that beyond pregenesis, if time is not the temporal dimension does not exist as we know it, and that moments are not chronologically tied together in some sort of perceivable, logical structure, then you get into the idea of is the monad itself another, simply another monad? Is it is each contractive end where the temporal dimension ends because, like what you've stated, reintegration has occurred? Does that reintegration itself, does it produce what's a way to describe this? I remember writing this down. It creates almost an ember. It creates some sort of ash. It creates some marker of the defeat of that shadow. Or there's something that still remains, and of course, light itself will always cast that. Will always cast that shadow. Do you see the way I'm...
I see what you mean. Well, in my view, I just don't consider that, because in my view, I am talking about an actual true integration that leaves absolutely no mark. If it leaves a mark, it's not actual integration. It's not a complete integration of that particular individual aspect. So that is just, we're talking concepts, but for one of the aspects of a true integration is that it absolutely leaves no mark. If it leaves any loose ends, then it's not an actual integration, it's a partial integration.
Yeah,
and yes.
I see what you're saying. You're saying a total singularity, if you will, of all potentiality contracted by... Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that. From a conceptual standpoint, I agree.
Very well. So we can consider this the addendum video to the AI conversation. It's a great pleasure, Silas, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's always great speaking with you, Armunn.
Yeah, likewise, man. And I hope to see you in Edinburgh and the general trip to Scotland next year.
Yes.
And
lots of deep fried Mars bars and...
oh my God. Oh yeah. Yeah, I can't bring food with me on the plane, so yeah. Nor wine. But yes, it's been a pleasure. And I hope to... that we have, of course, several other chances for more conversations of the sort.